What I'm going to try and do is, first of all, just let me ask you a question. How many of you have used Griffith's printed valuation? About half of you? So half of you haven't, I presume. You know what I mean by Griffith's printed valuation? Well, if you don't, you will in a few moments. So obviously we have a mixed ability class, as I would say. Some well at the top and others in other directions. So we'll try and deal with it as best we can. This is always a problem. This is always a problem. This is always a problem too. In the sense that there are people who know all about it, so to speak, and those who are just learning. So if you have to bear with me if you already know what I'm going to say in a few moments. I have a couple of PowerPoints here, which I'm going to use, and you have a handout, two pages, two back pages. One is the rural example, and one is the urban example, and no prizes for figuring which one's which. I've put a few things there that will be the key things that I would want to be talking about today, namely the Griffiths printed valuation, which is this one. On both, you'll see them in both pages. One is for the town, a street in the town, and one is for a town map. Because if you're using the Griffiths, you'll either be using it in the town or you'll be using it in the countryside. There is a map or maps below which link to that. The numbers on the map should match the numbers on the list. So that's part of the game. Then the next page, in both cases, has one page which looks like this. The top one of those. It's the same sort of page in both. That is a copy of a page from the revision books, which of course have just come online. In fact, they came online about exactly 2 years ago, if I'm right, April of 2013. So we've had them up and running for 2 years. And then the one below that is, I don't know, most of you might, do you recognize that one? Yeah. That's what's known as the Form B1 from the 1901 census. The Form B1 is the house and building return. And one of the things I want you to do, I want to show you today, some of you may already know how to do it, is to match the numbers in Griffiths with the numbers here. Because one of the things I find, people get in touch with me and they'll tell me, well, my ancestor lived in 22 Union Street in Ballymoney. And I look it up and I say, no, they don't, they live in 31. The reason being is 22 is the number that's on the census form, but it's not where they live. 22 is not 22 on the maps, the valuation maps, or on the street. In fact, the person lived on the other side of the street in number 31. And if you don't understand what I'm saying there, you will do, hopefully, by the time you leave, if you understand nothing else. The other thing I would like to do is say a little bit about, spend a bit of time on the revision pages, the revision books, where you have pages with all these strokes and colours and all sorts of things. I had hoped to do quite a bit on that, but it's difficult to put it up on the screen here to get it at a resolution where you can actually read the stuff. So you have at least 2 pages there which I will work with, and we'll try and work that out. So that's what we hope to do. Whether we achieve it or not is another question, but we'll do our best. So let me just start briefly as an introduction. As I said, valuation records provide us with information on properties. It's to do with taxation. It's not a census. I know it's seen as a substitute census, but it's a pretty poor substitute census, but it is all right. It's all we have. Now, the first general valuation of all houses and holdings in Ireland, officially known as the Primary Valuation of Ireland, was undertaken during the period 46 to 64. Dublin, for example, was published in 1847. Whereas parts of County Antrim aren't done until 1864. And remember, it's the whole of Ireland, so it doesn't all happen in a day or a week or a fortnight. It takes years to do it. And there were also other problems associated as well. The man who was in charge of it, Sir Richard Griffiths, who lived from 1784 to 1878, the valuation is better known as everybody knows it as the Griffiths valuation, but it's actually the Primary Valuation of Ireland. That's its official title. So if I say the Griffiths valuation, I'm referring to the printed page, which you have a copy of there. Completion dates, as I said, for the valuation vary throughout the country. Most in Ulster date from the late 1850s to the early 1860s. The earliest ones are over towards the west of County Derry, and they would be as early as 1856. You see, the point is that the printed version that you get is printed from what are known as manuscript books. And you'll see in a minute a little bit more about that. And therefore, there's a time lag. There's a time lag not only between areas, but there's a time lag between the actual valuing. It all has to be done by people, and they have to put it all in a book, a field book basically, and then it has to be taken to the printers in Dublin and printed and then given to the farmers, because that was the reason for the printed book. There's only one printed valuation, and that's that Griffiths valuation of that period. It was revised annually. I put annually in inverted commas. It's supposed to be revised annually, but quite often you're looking at it, my impression is it might be 2 years. I've even seen it longer than that, particularly out in the more remote areas. After all, for a valuers to do an annual revision of all the townlands and all the streets in Ireland is asking a lot, to be honest. A new general revaluation, that was revised, and those are the books that are known as the revision books, and they go usually in Ulster from 1860 to 1930, or thereabouts. Then there's a sort of a period from 1930 to 35. Remember, the new state has been set up in 21. They keep on using the Griffiths until 30. Then they decide they need a complete new general revaluation, and that takes place in 1935. And there were subsequent revisions of that, and new valuations every now and again. In fact, business rates are being looked at the moment, and there's a new valuation going on at this very moment as I speak. So it hasn't stopped. In other words, the Griffiths and all these valuations lead to the present day. Now, there was also an earlier townland valuation. This is known as a tenement valuation, the Griffiths, because it's about holdings. Tenement means, it doesn't mean the Gordons in Scotland, it means the tenements. The medieval meaning of the word tenement is holding. So you had a holding, a farm or a piece of ground and a building on it. But the townland valuation was simply, they valued all the soil. They looked at the different varieties of soil in the townland and given a valuation. And they didn't value very many houses. There was a limit on the number of, if the house was only valued at, it had to be valued at least £3 to be included, and then they raised it later to £5. The reason for that was, this was the 1830s. This is well before the famine. Ireland's population is probably at its highest. And for example, the townland that we're going to look at in a moment or two, Gortade in 1859 had something like 37 houses in it, 2 of which were unoccupied. So you had 35 occupied houses. In 1831, there were 60 houses, 55 occupied. So there's a big difference. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't value all the houses. So the townland valuations, I use it at times. It can be very useful at times, but it's not in the same league as the Griffiths valuation. Now, why would we use them? Well, those are the 4 things that I think of. I want to see, first of all, exactly where somebody lived during the 19th and 20th century. And when I say exactly, excuse me, but I have to have I mean exactly on the ground. I want to find the house, I want to know where it was, exactly. Even if it's no longer there. In most cases it isn't. It's built over or it's been raised to the ground, but I can find it in the sense that the site is still there. So I want to know that. It also tells us something about the kind of properties our ancestors were inhabiting. It's quite interesting to look at the kind of place they lived in. And actually that page that you have there, the printed valuation, in a moment or two I'll show you a few pictures which will give you an idea of what those figures mean. Because all you get are figures and names and bits of acres, roods and perches. You know what acres, roods and perches are? Looking, I suspect most of you would know acres, roods and perches. Because I haven't a clue about hectares. So it's useful to do that. The third thing is, and the big thing is, and that's why you have the revision books, the changes that take place in the property. You can take a property in a townland or in a street, and you can start in 1859, 60 or thereabouts, and you can take it right through, you can take it right through to 1972 in a townland or in a street. You can go further after 72, up to 1993, but, there's a difference. Where you were using a townland all the way through from 1860 to 1972, what happened in 72? They supposedly did away with townlands. Everywhere now is 144 Atlantic Road or whatever. And the valuation books use that. So if you're looking for a farm, you need to know the number of it and the road. And therefore you have to put the townland together again, if you follow what I mean. I don't bother using it after 72 for this reason. It's close enough to the present to be able to talk to somebody about it. It's much easier that way. But I have found now that I do need to know now, which I didn't need to know 40 years ago. I need to know things which are closer to the present if I'm talking to someone in a townland today. 40 years ago, I had people who could go back to 1830. There's nobody I know can go back to 1830 now. They might go back to about 1880 if they were lucky, and even then they usually get it wrong. So, everybody moves on, so to speak. And finally, it's also seen as a substitute census for the missing official census records in Ireland, which it is. After all, if you want to know where somebody, if your ancestor was around in such and such a place in 1860, there's only one place you can find it, to be honest, and that is in the Griffiths valuation. You can find it in birth records and so on and so forth, but you need to use that as a census. But it's not a full census by any means of the imagination. Now, what are the valuation records? There's the one I've just been talking about, the tenement valuation, which is 46 to 64. The red means it's online, and many have heard about Ask About Ireland. Not everybody, no. I would have thought more. Ask About Ireland is a site which I'll let you see in a moment or two, and we'll try and show you how to use it, because it means you can look for any townland, any street in Ireland, and you can find out who was living there at that particular time. Now, I mentioned to you the manuscript field books. Those there are the manuscript field books. They're only held in PRONI, and they're Val 2B, Val stroke 2B. And then there are maps that go with that, and they are known as Val 2A and Val 2D. Val 2A is a 6-inch map for the countryside, and Val 2D is the larger scale maps, usually about 4 feet to the mile or something like that. Val 2D, they would be for towns. They're really town plans. They're not proper maps, but they're good enough. Now that's the earlier one I mentioned to you. You'll notice it's Val 1B, and it's Val 1A, and it's Val 1D. If you're ordering this stuff, when you come here, you order it through the computerized system, you have to know those particular catalogue numbers. Then on the right-hand side coming in there are the Griffiths Valuation, I call them the Griffiths Valuation Revisions. I now just call them the revision books, frankly, because everybody knows what they are now, at least I think they do. And they're the books that are probably, I used to spend more time here looking at those books. Now I don't have to do that so much. I can sit at home and do it in a couple of minutes. They are Val 12Bs, and again there are maps associated with them, Val 12D and Val 12E. PRONI 6-inch and towns. Those are only available in PRONI. All that stuff there in black is available in PRONI. I just want to take that on a wee bit further now. Now, Griffiths, the Ask About Ireland is also a database. You can actually search for people, although it's difficult enough at times because it's what's known as an exact match database. In other words, if you don't spell the name properly, you don't get anybody. For example, if you're looking for somebody called Laverty, you may have, there's a Laverty in that, one of those handouts that I've given you, and it's spelled L-A-F-E-R-T-Y. If you don't put in L-A-F-E-R-T-Y, you do not find them. You would have to try and put in as many different spellings as possible, so it's limited in what it can do for you. Now, I actually see that there, although that's nothing to do, you might say, well, that's nothing to do with valuation records. Those are the census returns, but they are also a database. If I want to find somebody around about 1900, I use their database. It's not just a source that tells you, who all the people are in the house and this sort of thing, you can actually search it as a proper database if you know what you're doing. Now, I've put these two in because I'm not going to be dealing with them today, but I mentioned there the general revaluation, and there again, incidentally, this whole thing is on my website and you can read it in more detail. I'm not going to spend time with it now. But that's covering the period 35 to 57. That was the first revaluation. Then there's another one which covers the period 57 to about 72, 75. And that is the one I said is the end of the use of the townland. From then on it's 40 Cloyfrin Road or whatever. And it makes it a bit more difficult. You don't see the patterns as well in it. Now, I'm going to use Gortade, but you won't see that at the back. Gortade is a townland which lies between Mahara and Kilray, just outside the village of Upperlands, if you know where that is, in County Derry. There it is there. The Cross Keys is a crossroads, and that there is the townland of Gortade, and that's what we're going to look at. And I'm going to try and explain things using it as an example. Obviously, you'll be interested in your own townland or other townlands, but you can only choose one at the moment. Now, I would suggest that, are all of you quite happy with using online sources? Some people aren't. I have to say this, whether you like it or not, that's the way forward. You have to learn. You can still do it by hand. You can still come in here and look these things up. But it's much, much easier if you can do it online. And those are the two addresses that you have to go. There are links to those on my website as well. Now, first of all, let's take a look. Now, let's actually look for a moment or two at the actual source. You have this in your handout there. So if you can't read it from the back, just look at it. Now, I'm going to explain a few things. You'll notice that the information is, these are the numbers. Those are the numbers which number a plot of land or holding. Those are the people who occupy it. Not necessarily live in it, but occupy it. Not everybody who's there necessarily lives there. They're not a householder, in other words. They could have land somewhere else, and they could have a house somewhere else. So you have to be careful about that there. You have to actually get to know those people. I know most of them. Actually, I do. Yeah. I know most of them now, but it took me a long time to get to know them. Obviously, they're dead a long time, but nevertheless. This is the immediate lessor. You know what the immediate lessor is? No. The immediate lessor is the person to whom you pay your rent, or you leased your property from. You may not actually have a lease, but at least you have, there is always a landlord up until about 1903. When in this particular townland, all the farmers were able to buy their land out, land purchase. Any of you farmers? No, no farmers, because I was going to ask, do you still have the annuity payments that were made? There were annuity payments made up until about the 1960s, and there are dockets that go with them. And people, when I would give a talk, often they would say, oh, but we have those, we still have those at home, because they bought out their land, but they had to pay more or less, slightly less than the rent they were paying for about 60 years. But by the time about 30 years were up, they were paying pittance, to be honest. It was just a small, it's like a ground rent of a penny type of thing in the end.
It must have been going on in the 60s as well, because I remember taking the payments in the bank.
Oh yes, yes, it would be after the 60s. You see, the last buying out, not everybody bought out in 1903. Some had bought out earlier, incidentally. But the last buying out was about 1930. It took them up to about the 1930s before they finally got rid of all the land to the farmers. Now, it was only sold, of course, to the person who was the immediate lessor. Now, let me just show you something here. If this man had still been there, and he isn't, you see this man, William Hanning. Now, William Hanning has a house worth 10 shillings, or valued at 10 shillings. He has no land whatsoever. His immediate lessor isn't the Worshipful Company of Mercers, because this is the Mercers estate. You'll notice his immediate lessor is Archibald Keane Jr. Archibald Keane Jr. But Archibald Keane Jr., in actual fact, there he is there, his landlord is the Mercers Company. So the Mercers Company rents him, what is it, I can't read it. Land 12,230. You know what that means? 12 acres, 2 roods, and 30 purchases. You know how many purchases a rood? Hands up those who know any purchases a rood. 40, yes, 40. How many roods in an acre? 4. 4. Football pitch divided into 4 quarters, or thereabouts, and that will give you an idea. And take each quarter and divide it into 40 strips, and you've got your acres, roods, and purchase. And let me tell you, none of you are farmers, but if you were a farmer, and I said to you, well, you say, but it's 2 purchase, 20 purchase too short. There's a 20 purchase should be there somewhere. I mean, they know it down to the inches. They really do, seriously. They know every bit of it. Now, what we've got here is that Archibald Kane has 12,230, and that's fine, that's a farm. A small farm, but it's a farm. Whereas Hanny is actually what's known as a cottier. In other words, a cottier is someone who rents his house from a farmer. He is not directly paying his rent to the landlord, which in this case here, for most people, is the Mercer's Company. Now, what's interesting about this particular townland is there are very few cottiers. But you remember I mentioned you a figure. What was the figure? I can't never remember, so I have to write it down. In 1831, which is what, about 30 years before that, there were 60 houses in the townland, 55 were occupied. Now there are only 37, which is about, there's a third gone. I would suggest that the third were cottiers. Because actually, I'm not going to go into this, but if you look at, I have lists of tenants before, right about that same period, and lists of tenants, those are tenants there, basically. Those are tenant farmers. 9/10 of them are tenant farmers. But they're more or less the same names as they were in 1830. They didn't disappear. The cottiers disappeared because there was no work for them. Poverty, the famine, but it wasn't the famine that killed them off, really. It was already in progress, and people were leaving anyway because the linen trade had collapsed, more or less, at that time. But we're not going into that just now. So you're clear enough on immediate lessors, you're clear enough on townland and occupiers. This is simply a description of the tenement. It actually says description of tenement. It uses the word tenement, tenement meaning the holding. It's saying that Michael McGowan, house and land, Thomas McGrew, house and land, James Lynn, house and land, and so on and so forth. What you notice there is, it's just a house and land, just one house. Whereas you come down a bit, what do you get? You get, when we get down to here, house, offices and land. You know what offices are? Don't be like the Americans and tell me it's you sit at a desk. It's the outbuildings, it's the office buildings. Sometimes farmers would refer to them as the office buildings. They are the, in other words, that's where the work's done. That's where the capital and all that sort of stuff is kept. Buyer, there'll be a buyer, maybe a barn, but there's nothing there. In fact, house, offices and land, and here you get a lot of house, office and land, house, office and land. That really means, the singular really means there's only one office building. That means these are not high polluting farms. So, but this one here, for example, John Kane and Archibald Kane, who incidentally are not related in any way whatsoever. I thought they were at one time, but they aren't now. Let me just move on quickly. I want to use that again, but move on and show you some photographs. You see the valuation of the houses. This is the value. This is the acres, roods, and purchase. This is the land. Now you need to know this because the revision books are exactly the same. This is standard. This goes right through to 1972 or even 1993 as well. So you need to know, it'll always be acres, roods and purchase. Then LSD, I don't have to tell you what LSD is. No. Sometimes I do have to do it with younger generation. I was talking to a direct descendant of Archibald Kane Sr., Sean O'Kane, a couple of nights ago actually. And he's about, I'd say he looks about, I don't think he's even 40, he may be about 40. But he doesn't really, pounds, shillings and pence don't mean a lot to him. Acres, roods and purchase, they're still using it, no problem there. But not the pounds, shillings and pence. So 5 shillings is what, 25p? 10 shillings is 50p. And look at, these are not very good houses. A pound's quite good. The biggest, £1.10 for John Kane and £1.10 for Archibald Kane. Now, let me just show you these 4 photographs. Because the figures don't mean much, do they? But look, that there is a photograph taken, I think it was about 1996, of a house. Now this is the same house. Well, it's not the same house, obviously. That was knocked down completely in 1996 and built. This was built over that. Okay, that's just a complete. It was a period when you had to actually have a wall of the old building in the new building. Later on, they dropped that. You didn't have to have that, but at that time they did. So there is a house. Now look at this here. This is when they found this stone there, just about there. By me, John White, 1789 M. I don't know what the M means exactly.
Mason.
But Mason could be, yeah. I was trying to think, because it's not. He wasn't sort of trying to make a thousand or something like that. It could be Mason. It could be by me. And it's pretty crude, but that he has that. He actually has that inside this new house. But he also has a plaque there which you can't read, that he built that house was rebuilt in 1996. It lay for a long time in that state there. But that's the house. Actually, it's wrong to call it the house, because the actual valuation of the building is the valuation of all the buildings. The house is only part of it. The offices also are included. So the valuation of that, way back then, was £1.10. Now that's pretty typical of what you'll see if you really, pull away all the fancy stuff we have in the farmyards today. You'll often see that sort of building out somewhere in amongst the office housing, and a new house built on a farm now. And there were houses built in the 50s. I remember seeing houses built in the 50s, and that there would have been left for all its office buildings. And in fact, that was a house plus office buildings. I mean, it's changed a lot over the years. You'll notice that's the old, the thatch has given way to, corrugated iron. But in actual fact, the 1901 census shows that house was slated. That house was actually slated, but the slates were probably taken off later on. Now this is the other house. This is a very modern house. But both of these are actually that looks like a barn, and that's a very modern house. And again, you've got corrugated iron, and I think you may have some slates there, and those quite good chimneys. So that really doesn't reflect. But that is the farm or the farmhouses in more recent times. But nobody's living there now, and that was Archibald Kane, Senior, the other one that I told you about. So that gives you an idea of what a house that's valued at, as we saw, £1.10. That's the sort of house that's what they would look like. Whereas these houses are different. I took these photographs in 1970, and that house there, you've seen many of those. Now that's valued at 10 shillings. So if you see 10 shillings, think along those lines. You transfer the figures. You have to have a mental picture or a visualization of what the page is telling you, and that's what it is. Now this is a difficult one. It's very small, I'm afraid. That there is the ruins of another house, but you can hardly make it out. But that was a story and a half house that was slated actually, and therefore, but once it fell into ruin. Americans come over and they go looking for these houses, and they think, well, where are they? They've disappeared. They've just gone. They've been destroyed almost. There's another house. Now that one's down at the Cross Keys, which, remember I showed you the Cross Keys on that map? That was a hotel, an inn at one time, and a shop. And there was apparently Cross Keys on that gable wall. That one was valued at something like £3.15. Now I'd say that has also been embellished a bit since it was valued at £3.15 in 1860. But it's to give you an idea of what houses are like when you look at an actual valuation sheet. Incidentally, very quickly, you have that there. But you'll notice there's John Kane's slated That 1 means they're all built of brick or stone. The 1 means that they are, those I've marked in red, that means that those are the 3 houses in the townland at that time that were slated. Not many houses were slated. The rest of this code I'm not going to go into now. But do you notice there, that down there I have put red numbers, and you have that on your handout there. Now what are those red numbers? Those red numbers, remember I said to you that it's important if you really want to find out exactly where your ancestor lived, and most of us do. You don't want to be led up the garden path and told, oh, they lived over there when they actually lived over there. Actually, there was a man who came over from America and he got it completely wrong. He thought that John Cain's house was where his ancestor came from. It wasn't within 200 yards of it. But anyway, that's by the way. Number 1 is number 1. That's fair enough. You will get matches, perfect matches, where the 1 and the 1 matches. Number 2 is not number 2, it's 4. What it means is this. If you can't read this, you have a copy of it there. 1, 2, 3, 4, that goes 1 to 17. The numerator will actually just simply put a number in the house as he goes round the townland. Now he came into the townland at the top of the townland because Michael McKegney lived at the very top. And then he came down a bit and he came across Margaret Mellon, who was a widow of, if you look at your Griffiths there, she was a widow of Thomas Mellon, as it turns out. Then the next person he came to was a Patrick Lafferty. Then he came to John Cain. And John Cain is the one that that house we've just looked at that was rebuilt in 1996. Then we've got to 14. That is Archibald Cain Archibald Cain Senior's house. And then 6 is Lafferty's house. That was that little house we saw there. It was valued at 10 shillings. With the, you remember the one months ago? That one there. That one. That's that one there, right? So we know. Actually, the lady who lived in that in 1970 was a lady called Lizzie Kearney. Unfortunately, I didn't get a photograph of her. I should have. She was a bit shy, so she wouldn't stand in the doorway. So I never did get a photograph of her. But obviously, she's long since gone. So you see how I'm trying to. I can do that for any townland anywhere, providing I have the Griffiths valuation and the revision books. And then you know you've got it right. And quite often you don't get it right, you just have to work at it. Sometimes you can't be absolutely sure. For example, now there's one there. I decided not to put a number there, but I know because I'm pretty sure that these two were living beside each other. You will find that usually they are geographically adjacent, but there's the odd instance when it's obvious that the enumerator has forgotten somebody, and he sticks them in at the end. And you think, oh, they're living at the end of the street. No, they're not. He just forgot. And seriously, I mean, I have a number of examples I could show you of those. I haven't with me today, but he just forgot. Or I think maybe if he was doing it over 2 days, the second day, he decided to start somewhere else, and therefore he did a different run. I mean, you can actually trace them. For example, the 1901 enumerator was different from the 1911. Can we look at the map now, please? That map there. There's the map. It's not, you have a map there as well, you have a bit of it. There's the top of the townland, there's the bottom of the townland. There's the cross keys there, right? I know this is not very clear, but it follows my red dot. He came in, and he came down in 1901, and he did this area here, and he included people on this side of the road as he came down here, and people on that side of the road. And then he went across here, and I think he did a tour around here and down in. But seriously, you can actually trace him precisely almost. It's different in towns. Sometimes they get a bit better. If there's shops in a town and there's nobody living there, they can sometimes cross back and forwards, and it gets a bit complicated. But in the countryside, I usually can trace them fairly easily. Now, in 1911, the enumerator came in at the top again, but he went straight down the Keeley Road. That's the Keeley Road there to Cross Keys, and he only took people who lived on the road or very close to the road, he didn't go in. There's lanes go in here, he didn't go in the lanes. Because sometimes they'll go in the lanes, sometimes they'll cross fields. I was brought up in the country. I never used even the lanes, I used the fields. It was the quickest way to get from A to B. And I mean, people did that, this was the 40s and 50s. You just, I want to go see so-and-so, all right, go that way. Whereas nowadays you would get in the car and you would drive around all the proper roads. That didn't happen at that time. So there is a connection there. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to connect this here, this map, with what do you call it, the census and the valuation books. It's the valuation books that will give you the key. Now let me see where we go. No, I don't think I'll do. Incidentally, the proper map that goes with it will be that map, which is. I used to sit here in PRONI and watch people poring over those maps. Do you remember the time? I mean, I felt embarrassed because they didn't need to, you know, but they did it. And they couldn't find the numbers. And the numbers were, I mean, I put on some numbers there, but really, they're not very good. That's the Val 2A, which goes with the Griffiths printed. But what you do instead is, you don't do that. You either go to Ask About Ireland, which I'm going to do in a moment, and use their map, or you go and use what's known as the Val 12D map. Now, how many of you have ever heard of the Val 12D maps? Ah, yes, good. The Val 12, they will replace this. The closer, I had a look at the Val 12D maps today. Now, you can't see that very well in the back, I'm sure. Can you at all? I'm going to explain it to you. There, I used the e-catalog. This is the search. Now, for the search, I'm going to. What you do is this: you put in the PRONI reference box, val stroke. Remember the strokes, the forward slash. Or I prefer to call them strokes rather than forward slash. Val stroke 12 stroke D stroke 5 stroke 32 asterisk. Now that means that you will get a Val 12 map or a Val 12D map. Because it's a 5, it's County Derry. If it was Antrim, it would be 1. If it was Armagh, it would be 2. You see what I'm getting at? Just keep on until you get to Tyrone and you'll be at 6. That's as simple as that. I had an American chap last week, and he'd been trying for 2 years to find out the numbering. And he had tried to Ask About Ireland, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But it was no good. There are some maps on Ask About Ireland that are useless. I mean that. Literally useless. It's not their fault, it's just the map, they picked their own map. And I said, well, where is it? Oh, it's Ballyknocken. You know where Ballyknocken is? It's in County Down. It's near Saintfield. It's very near Saintfield. I said, right, let's look for it. I said, let's try we'll try the Val 12Ds. Let's try Val 12D, Val stroke 12D stroke 3. Stroke, what's the number? 16. 16. Right, we got it. And out comes a list of, what will happen every time is, out will come a list like this. And this one, this is the Gortade one. This is from Gortade, because Gortade, how did I know to go for 32 incidentally for Gortade? And how did I know to go for 16 County Down for Ballyknocken? How do I know that? Very simple. Have a look at your Griffiths. Under Gortade it says, brackets, ORDS, the Ordnance Survey sheet, 32 and 33. You'll always get that there. And as long as you know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll know which number to put in after the Val 12D. And out it came, and there was only, this is the one that comes out for Gortade. Now, I'm going to dwell on this in a minute because if you're going to use these maps, you have to really understand this. This is where people get confused. You'll notice that there are, what, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 maps covering the period from 1860 to 1935. Now, obviously, if you're going to be using the revision books, you're better to get a map that is closer to the dates of the books that you're using. If you're using, for example, books that are from 1900 to 1912 or something like that there, wouldn't you be better using something like 1895 to 1915, or even 1908 to 1935, rather than 1860 to 1879? Because why? Why would you want to do that? Because there might have been some changes in the numbering of the maps, and quite often there are. As it so happens in Gortaic, there's never any change. I've never seen a townland like it. It's absolutely the same even in 1972, never mind 1860. But quite often there will be changes. Consolidation of farms, break-up of farms, all sorts of things that will lead to changes in numbering and lettering. Now, what I've got here is, the other problem here is that this particular sheet 32 has, how do I put this? It's about, it's about, you know the size of a 6-inch sheet. Now, the top right-hand corner, there's two townlands, Ballynyan and Tivaconaby. They're both in what's known as Ballymoney Union until 1898, which becomes Coleraine Union after that. Then the vast majority of it in the middle is in MacAfee Union. You know where MacAfee is, yeah?
Yeah.
And then the bit over to the west is in Limavady Union, because there's the mountains and you're going down into the Roe Valley. But you can dismiss the Limavady Union because it's only it's a strip of very high land and very little numbering on it. You wouldn't even be bothered with it. So you can ignore the Limavady Union. But you want to make sure, if you were looking for somebody in the Ballymoney Union, which would be, as I say, Tivaconaby, which is next door to Gortaic, you would have to make sure that you got that copy. Now, what I find on average, I've used these for different places, and I find on average the ones from 1860 to about 1880 or 1879 are usually, there'll be one sheet, there'll be if there are three parallel unions, there'll be three separate sheets, and each will have its own. So in other words, the Ballymoney one will only have the two townlands in the top right-hand corner. The rest of it will look like an ordnance survey map. Because remember, these are ordnance survey maps, which are then when you put the numbers on, the values put the numbers on. So the first one here, I had a look at them today. I looked at all of those. I actually took them out and looked at them again. I've done it before. Limavady only. So you can ignore the first one. The one that I've given you a copy of is 32B, which is MacAfee only, because that's where Gortaic is. That's the parallel union it's in. You try and think of your place, and which parallel union would your townland be? Or would it be, would you have a sheet which would have more than, that Ballynaughton one had three parallel unions: Lisburn, Downpatrick, and Newton Ards. And the one that's actually on the Ask About Ireland sheet, or Ask About Ireland site, is the one for Downpatrick, and there's only one townland. I can't remember the name of it. It's Carson Town, I think it's called. And that's the only. The rest of it's all blank. No, well, not blank. It's blank with numbers. That's the point. Then the next one is Ballymoney only, Ballymoney only. Then from that point, you see all these asterisk ones. It wouldn't matter which one of those you brought out. You'll get all the unions. For some reason or other, after about 1880, they decide to stop this silly thing of wasting maps, whether using 3 maps or 1 would have done. And remember, these are working maps. These are the maps that the valuers use. These are not, done for sale or anything like that there. Then at the very end here, you go down to Coleraine Rural District and MacAfee Rural District, because you're in a different. So you would pick out. You could have any of those maps there and it would do the job. If you want Gortaic, then you pick that B. If you want the two townlands I mentioned in the Ballymoney, which later became Coleraine, you would pick those two there. You get the idea. So you quite often, to be honest with you, you just have to bring them out and sort them out yourself, because it's not that easy to do. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
It's I'm leaving the point a bit, but I find people just do not get their head around this sometimes, and they just can't use the map properly. Now, now look at what it says at the top. PRONI Val 12D5 32B 1860 to 1883. So it's covering that period. And it's not too bad. It's not the best map in the world, but it's reasonable. But I wouldn't bother using any of these if I knew for sure I could get the Ask About Ireland one, and that the Ask About Ireland one was a good match for the numbering in the valuation records I'm using. Now I know it is in the case of Gortaid. I know in other places it's completely useless. I have to go and get one of these. So I have to make choices. That's the point. And sometimes I even have to go back to the Val 2A to find a house which is in amongst all that mess that you saw there earlier. Remember the Val 2A I showed you a minute ago? I have used maps like that to find somebody in there somewhere. And I've actually scanned it and blown it up to see if I could find it. And eventually I did find it. You sometimes have to do that. Anyway, what I would do is this, and I'm going to switch quickly here to no, I want out of that one. Sorry, give me a second. Take a bit of this. That's why I don't like using the online stuff, because it takes a wee while. Bear with me a second. I'm hoping this is going to work. No, it's not. If you want to go to Ask About Ireland, I can't see this. You can only do this by doing it. I mean, to do it and an overhead doesn't work. I'm going to Ask About it. This is Ask About Ireland. Have you seen that before?
Yes.
Who hasn't?
Me.
Oh, right, that's good. At least a few have. I'll probably have to finish in this, folks. Because this is going to take a minute or two. Now there's the Ask About Ireland. And it is, you have a choice. You can either search for a family name or you can search for a place. Now I normally don't bother with family names because, as I said to you earlier, I have to get it dead right. And I have other databases I can use for that anyway. But I'm going to go for a place name search, so can you see this? Yes. I'm going to change to place name. You have to change it to place name. The default is family name. And I'm going to put Gortaid in there, and it so happens, you should also put in other stuff, the barony, the parish, and all that sort of stuff. For Gortaid, you get it straight. You don't even have to worry about it. Just type in Gortaid. Right, I've got Gortaid. Can you see that?
Yeah.
At the back, can you actually see that?
No,
Not really. Well, I'll tell you, that says place name Gortaid, County Londonderry, Barony of Loughinchilin, Parish of Macarath, Townland of Gortaid, occupants. Now, if I do that, it'll give me that, right? Which is all the occupants. You see, do you not recognise Michael McGowan, Thomas McGrew, and James Lynn?
Yes.
I know you can't see it, but I'm telling you. sorry. I apologise. You see, I never use the details. It's a load of rubbish. I would go to the original page, and you have a choice of a bigger one or a smaller one. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. Let's take the smaller one just for badness. Okay. Now you can't see that. Of course you can't see that. But you can zoom it. Or can you? Sometimes it does, so I'll take the other one. Sometimes it doesn't let me. I'll take the bigger one then. That should let me zoom it. Where's all right? That's all. There's usually a zoom.
Just lay it on your right hand side, Bill.
Very bottom.
I know it's at the very bottom, but I thought it was at the very bottom. Never use online when you're trying to.
There you go.
There it is. You see that there? Increase size, increase size, increase size. Bear with me, it's there all right. But you see the idea that you will be, or I'll tell you what you do instead. Forget about the whole thing and just go print. You see that print up there?
Yes.
Now this won't work. It can't because I haven't. No, but it does. It goes to there, right? Click to print, right? You notice that they put their watermark on it so that you don't. There's copyright on it. You see, you can't use it. So you click to print. So it will click to print, and that's on my machine. So I choose which printer I want, but I can't print here. But you just choose the printer, go through your normal printing process, and press click, and you will get a page. Now it's hard to read. Maybe it's not as nice as the one I have given you. That one's actually taken out of the proper books, but it will do the job. That means you can sit there and you can go around all the townlands you want in Ireland. Doesn't matter where they are. I could go to Ballynockin, which I know nothing whatsoever about. I don't really know where it is. I know it's outside Saintfield, but that's about as far as it goes. And I can print it out and I can see, I'll do the same analysis of it as I did of this. I must have done thousands of these over, well not thousands, maybe 100 over the years. It's the same process, right? So I have now got myself, you put yourself in the position where you want to find your particular townland, so you've got it. And you've printed it, and that's fine. So we'll close that. And we'll close that. So are you clear enough on how to get from using that or that and print?
Yeah.
Or you'll find it a lot easier when you're, actually doing it. Now, where do I have to go now? Now I've got map views. Now there are two map views. One is inside that wee box, which I hate. I would never use it. Never use it. I would use this one here, the bigger one. There's two icons there. You see that is slightly bigger. I click on that one. And that should open on a separate page, says he. Pop-ups were blocked on this page. I don't normally get blocked. Come on.
Yes, move it forward.
Press the controls. Well, I did.
Top right there, Bill.
It's up on the top.
Yeah.
Where?
The tab's at the top.
See,
Where is it? I can't see.
up at the green pass. Up, right up at the top.
There you go, up there.
One of those. Click on that. There you go.
Huh? I've never experienced that. But you see, you're used to your own machine. And this is not my own machine. Well, it is my own machine, but it's not. No, you see where we are now. This is now. I could actually make that smaller and show you what I mean. My problem here is light. Lack of it. Hold on. I'm going to bring this down a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the reason I'm doing that is to go back to the point I made earlier about we're lucky we're going to go to Gortade because we're going to get a good map. I'll promise you that. But you see, if you're over in County Antrim, this is County Antrim here. Look at that, rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Those there will give you'll get an odd, you might find an odd place, but very few. Those are bad. And there's a group going right across County Derry. And those are not good. And there, incidentally, is Bally. And you see that one down there? That's the one there, the Ballynockin's on. I can guarantee you that's where Ballynockin is. It's on that one. And it's down, the Carson town is down about there, for the handles. But it's no good to you, because it's not going to show you anything of any use to you. Now let's go back and go zup the other way. Now you notice also, have I lost this? No, I haven't. You notice that, you see the circle? The circle is where because you put in Gortade, it's going to show you the maps that have Gortade on. And you'll notice that there are two sheets here. This is sheet 32, and this is sheet 33. Gortade is about there, right? And what we've got to do now is, are you with me?
Yeah.
Straightforward. It's normal Google practice. You come in a bit further. Portland Own, well, it's west of Portland Own. I know the shape of it. You should know the shape of it. It's terrible when you're sort of standing at an angle. Where am I? I'm on it now, yeah. Yeah. And you see where it is?
Yes. Just to the right.
There it is, there. You see it?
Just to the right.
And you see it? That's it there.
Yeah.
I can make that bigger, but you see it's distorted a bit because of there's the Kilray Road, yes. Now, where is it? There we are. You see it better than I do. My neck's getting sore, look at that. Here we have it. So, now, this is not a good picture. You will get a much better picture on your machine at home.
It's not bad.
It's not bad, it's because it's squashed.
Yeah.
I have to change, I should have changed the resolution of the machine, but I didn't get right. I'm always scared of doing that. Right. Now what I'm going to do now quickly, because this is not perfect, I'm going to say to you, you can see where, for example, you remember 14. There's 14A and B. Do you remember the photograph of the big long house?
Yeah.
You see that there? Yeah? You remember this house here? This is 12A. This is where, remember, we had the new house with the 1789. This house was built originally in 1789, and then it was knocked down about 1996 and built with the new house. You with me? And where's Lizzie Kearney's cottage? 6 feet. That's it there. That's Lizzie Kearney's. And that there is another house, which I'll show you in a moment, doesn't exist at all anymore. What I'm going to do now is the final bit here. I'm going to change. You see where it says up here, it says satellite and map. If I simply click on map and pull that slider right along, if you're looking for a road and you're not sure where your townland is, do that. And that's the Keeley Road. Now, if you were in that part of the world, you'd know where the Keeley Road was, the Kilray Road, etc., etc. And those roads help you to find your own townland, because you may not be sure where it is. If you're going to a strange townland, you've suddenly found an ancestor that you didn't know ever existed, you're going to find them. That's how you do it. Now, also, let's go on the satellite.
Oh, yeah.
That's a Google satellite. There are 3 maps here, and they're superimposed on each other, and you slide back and forward so that you superimpose whatever you want. That is a satellite. That's the same as a Google Earth map. That is a Google Earth map. And it is, you'll notice it still has the roads. That says Keeley Road. Hillside Road's up here, and down here would be the Kilray Road. And you can change the scale. You just zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, and whatever. But that's fine. Now, you recognise that house? You probably don't. Because that is the one. That's 12A. That's 12A. Small a. That there, you see that house? That's a long house. Do you remember the long house with the barn? What looked like a barn opposite? That's it there. There's the lane down. And there's that, what I call it Lizzie Kearney's cottage. You remember the small house valued at 10 shillings? Right? Now here is, this is Seamus Kearney's house. It's a brand new house. You see his front garden? That's his front garden. There's a lane runs down there. You with me? You remember that house I said to you that completely disappeared? Well, that's where it's disappeared, into the middle of that garden. Because it was a ruin. He remembers the ruin. But he built later than his cousin John, and he didn't have to have his house with a wall in it. He changed the rules about. Does anybody know when that happened? Probably about 2000 something. About that. It was in. It doesn't matter. The fact is that they then used rid of some of the rubble, but that's exactly where that house is. So if somebody comes, that's what the American was looking for. But when he was looking for it, the ruins might have been there. He would have seen the ruins. Now he'll never see the ruins. Well, he would see them in the ruins in my photograph. You see where we're going here? You see, and you can do this. I mean, it's all very well looking at this. You're not a bit interested in Portrait. Yeah, well, I've been. I just use it as an example. You want to then see yourself as, where's my townland? How do I get to it? This is the mechanism that allows you to get to it. All right? Now, can we have 5 more minutes? Or do you want to go now? It's 2 o'clock.
Is the next one starting here?
If you stay here for the
else?
practical workshop, is it?
Yeah.
You just stay here, we'll get sorted. Go on ahead, 5 minutes.
I just want to finish. So then what I do is this then. I then start and use the slider. You see what happens when I start using the slider? Nothing. Magician. Now, you see what's happening now? You superimpose one on the other. Now, you didn't believe me that house was in the middle of that garden, did you? You shouldn't have. You should know. You shouldn't believe everything you hear. But look carefully. Look carefully. There's Seamus. That's Seamus's house there. That's the roof of it. There is the house which was 10A and 10B. If you look at Griffiths, and you will see that. Where are we? 10A and 10B. You will see that was occupied originally by Patrick Kane at this end of the house and Bernard Kane at this end of the house. And Bernard actually emigrated to America, and his descendants live in the west coast of America today. Tim Kane is one of his descendants. Patrick died. Patrick was a stonemason. He was a bachelor. He died in 1877, I think. And his brother Michael carried on. And that's where that's where the revision books come in. You just simply follow the revision books. Now, you can do that on my website. I have set up pages. So what I would suggest to you is this. If you go to my website and you look up John Cain, 12, number 12 in Gortia, and you look up Archibald Cain, and you also look up Patrick Cain and Bernard Cain. In other words, if you look at 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, those 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, you will be able to go and see the pages from the revision books. They're all, you just click, 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 and you will be able to follow what happens. And in following what happens, very briefly, you would look at the, for example, if you take the Gortade one there, Michael McKegney, and you see all the different colours. Basically, if you see a name stroked out or a new name added, look at the colour, go to the far right, which is the observations column, and you will see numbers there in the same colour, or near enough the same colour. Fading does cause some problems here. You will see the numbers in different colours, and what you do then is you match up the colours. I'll show you one before I go here. Are you all right with Ask About Ireland?
What's your website?
BillMcAfee.com. Spelled.
Yeah. On the Griffiths page, there are brackets.
Oh, it's down there. Oh, yes.
Could you explain the
Where's
brackets?
Frank? Where?
On the Griffiths valuation page.
Where? Show me. Oh, aye, those, that means they're joint. For example, there you've got brackets for Patrick McMaster Senior and Junior. That means they are holding the land. They have a separate house, but the land is held in common. The land is held between them.
So I have on my own, I have my great-grandfather's name and there's brackets on his.
I need to see it. I need to see it. We'll have a chat afterwards. Because unless I see it, I wouldn't know. Sorry, what was you saying there about...
Revision books? The colour book?
Oh, the colours. Yeah, the colours. And you'll also find that the numbers on the right-hand side are usually only 2 digits. So if you see 69, it means it's 1869. I mean, it wouldn't be 1969. And it wouldn't be 1869. It wouldn't be 1769. If you see 71, this was the final thing I was going to do, but I need to get rid of that to do it. If you go to, what is it? Oh, come on. Bear with me. I have one here that I enlarged a bit. There's one. If you want to really get a hard one, this is a hard one. I would have used this at the end. This is a real beauty. Because look, this is simple. This is a simple one. Michael Cain takes over from Archibald Jr. Actually, they're brothers, would you believe? And Archibald Sr. has 3 sons. Michael, Archibald Cain Jr. and Anthony Cain. But here's Michael taking over 8A. 8, you know where 8 is on the map, and 8 is, and where 8 is, it was Archibald. Michael Cain, same meaning, that's the immediate lessor. Land, it now becomes house and land, he's going to live there. See the number 83? 83 means he did it in 80. No, he didn't do it in 83. It was done by 83. What does that mean? It means that it could have happened in 82 or even 81. It all depends. The valuer can only record it when he comes round. If he doesn't come round to 83 and it's happened, say, in 81, he'll be doing 83. Because that's his observation. He's not going to ask people, when did this happen? You know yourself. People would, anybody who, if people come round, nobody would say, I'm only in last week. Isn't that the case?
Yeah.
Most of the time? Anyway, right, so this one here is a nightmare. You'll see that one if you look at what I'm telling you in my website. You will see this one, and you'll be able to see it more clearly. Now, the only thing I can say is this, and it can be dead sure of. It started off with Patrick McMaster Senior and Junior, and it ended up with William Crilly in 1883 being the tenant. But in between, if you would like to try and work that out, I've tried. I'm still not sure, but I think it looked as if there was Houston's took it over, and then it went from Houston's to Daniel Crilly, and then there's Reps Daniel Crilly. Do you know what that means? Representatives of. Daniel is dead, and somebody's looking after the estate, that's it. And then finally, William Crilly, I'm not sure who he is, but you get the, does that sort of give you an idea? I mean, that's all it's to it, you know. But you have to do a bit of reading, and then the interpretation comes from not only being able to read it, but being able to apply genealogical information such as birth, deaths, and marriages, etc., etc. I know when he died, etc., etc. You have to. It's not. You don't do it on its own. I'm sorry I had to rush that at the end, and I didn't get much time on this. But was that enough to keep you going?